Okay, thank you. Thank you for being here on this gloomy November, horrible looking afternoon. It's going to be an ice storm tomorrow, so today's great. But I'm really glad to see you all are here for a really exciting event. So first, please put your phone in airplane mode or turn it off, please. The New York Times Book Review called R.O. Kwon's debut novel, The Incendiaries, radiant, a dark, absorbing story of how first love can be as intoxicating and dangerous as religious fundamentalism. Celeste Ng, author of Little Fires Everywhere, writes, "The Incendiaries probes the seductive and dangerous places to which we drift when loss unmoors us. In dazzlingly acrobatic prose, R.O. Kwon explores the lines between faith and fanaticism, passion and violence, the rational and the unknowable." R.O. Kwon is an NEA fellow, and she has received residency and other awards from Yaddo, MacDowell, Bread Loaf, Sewanee, the Steinbeck Center, Norman Mailer Writers Colony, and I think I left out a couple. Born in South Korea, she has lived in the US most of her life. I have known R.O. Kwon since she was my student at Yale in intermediate fiction 432 in 2003. I have had no doubt from then to now that she would write something extraordinary. She says this novel took her 10 years. Take note, of you who are impatient with yourselves, it's 10 years well spent. An incredibly poised and well-calculated high-stakes novel of love, faith, lost faith, secrets, and intrigue. The Incendiaries is a sly campus novel that is so much more than a campus novel. It's elegant and strange and profound. Please welcome R.O. Kwon.
I'm so glad and excited to be here. Thank you for coming. Thank you to Kenyon College, and thank you to Catherine, and thank you to the Kenyon Review for hosting tonight's event. It's meant so much to me that I was coming here to be with. She was one of my first writing professors. She was my first writing professor in sort of a formal fiction workshop, essentially, and it was an amazing class. I'm so glad to be here. Hi. So I'm going to read from The Incendiaries. It's my first novel. It's about a Korean-American woman, Phoebe Lin, who is pulled into a radical group that turns out to be a cult with enigmatic ties to North Korea. The cult eventually bombs 5 U.S. abortion clinics, healthcare clinics, in the name of faith, and when several bystanders die, she disappears. So I worked on this novel for 10 years, as Catherine noted, which means I've, for 10 years, attended a lot of parties and dinner parties and most harrowingly Thanksgivings at which people ask what I do, and I would say, I write, I'm working on a novel. Naturally enough, they would then ask, well, what's a novel about? And I would give pretty much the spiel I just gave for those 10 years, and by far the most common follow-up question has been, is your novel autobiographical? Which I've never known how to answer, because I think there are only so many ways to interpret that question, right? I mean, they're asking, have I been a violent terrorist? Have I blown up buildings? Or have I been involved in a violent radical cult? And so the short answer is no, I haven't blown up any buildings, not just yet. But there is a longer possible answer about what obsessions and losses led to the book. So I thought I'd just touch on those briefly before reading a little from it. The novel does draw on my own background as a formerly zealous evangelizing Christian. Until I was 17 and stopped believing, my entire life plan was to become a preacher or a missionary, or maybe a recluse in a cave. I hadn't really thought through the details, but I was psyched about it. I've long since left the faith behind, but I do often still find the loss to be as fresh as though it happened a few days ago. And perhaps as a result of how different I am from the God-crazed girl I used to be, I'm fascinated by the variety in people's definitions of good and of right. In The Incendiaries, I was drawn to bridging imaginative chasms between rational and fanatic worldviews. In addition, I have distant family members I've never met who live or lived, for all I know, in North Korea, and who I'll never meet. And so for a while, to try to fill that hole in knowledge, that longing, I kept reading accounts of North Korea. But what little information makes it out is so incomplete, and eventually I became interested in exploring that gap. But in writing about North Korea, it was of vital importance to me that I not make any claims about a place I've never seen, that I've never been able to visit, and that so few people outside of North Korea ever do get to see. It's so different, right, than writing about, like, Montreal. A lot of people have been to Montreal, and you can say what you want about Montreal, and people might disagree with you or they might not, but you don't have that burden of responsibility that comes with talking about something that so few people know about. So even as I gave a North Korean past to the novel's cult leader, John Leal, I hoped to explore some of the vast gaps in knowledge about that country and to dwell imaginatively in that place of unknowing itself. So the book alternates between 3 points of view: that of Phoebe Lynn, the woman who falls into the cult, John Leal, the cult leader, and Will Kendall, who loves Phoebe and opposes the cult and much of what it represents. So I'll read a section from each of their points of view from the start of the book. 1. Will. They'd have gathered on a rooftop in Knoxhurst to watch the explosion. Platt Hall, I think, 11 floors up. I know his ego, and he'd have picked the tallest point he could. So often, I've imagined how they felt, waiting. With 6 minutes left, the slant light of dusk reddened the high old spires of the college, the level gables of its surrounding town. They poured festive wine into big-bellied glasses. Handshaking, they laughed. She would sit apart from this reveling group, cross-legged on the roof's west ledge. 3 minutes to go. 2, 1. The Phipps building fell. Smoke plumed the breath of God. Silence followed, then the group's shouts of triumph. Wine glasses clashed together, flashing martial light. He sang the first bars of a Cheja psalm. Others soon joined in. Carolyn bells chimed, distant birds blowing white, strewn, like dandelion tufts, an outsized wish. It must have been then that John Leal came to her side. In his bare feet, he closed his arm around her shoulders. She flinched, looking up at him. I can imagine how he'd have tightened his hold, telling her she'd done well, though before long it would be time to act again, to do a little more. But this is where I start having trouble, Phoebe. Buildings fell. People died. You once told me I hadn't even tried to understand. So here I am, trying. 2. John Leal. Once John Leal left Knoxhurst, halfway through his last term of college, he drifted until he ended up in Yenji, China. In this city, adjacent to North Korea, he began working with an activist group that smuggled Korean refugees toward asylum in Seoul. He'd found his life's work, he thought. Instead, he was kidnapped by North Korean agents, spirited across the border, and thrown into a prison camp outside of Pyongyang. In the stories he later told the group, he said the Gulag brutalities were bad enough, but at least they'd been expected. What astonished him was the allegiance his fellow inmates showed toward the lunatic despot whose policies had installed them in their cells. They'd been jailed because, they'd splashed a drop of tea on his newsprint portrait. A neighbor claimed to have overheard them whistling a South Korean pop song. Punished for absurdities, they still maintained that the beloved sovereign, a divine being, couldn't be to blame. At first, he assumed this was lip service, the prisoners afraid to say otherwise. But then, he thought of the refugees he'd met in Yenji, how they talked of loving the God they'd fled. They attributed the regime's troubles to anyone but the sole person in charge. A month into John Leal's time in the Gulag, prison guards held an optional foot race, the prize a framed icon of the despot. In the confusion, those who fell were trampled. One child died of a broken spine. Through howls of pain, he shouted hosannas for his Lord. They weren't lying, the poor fools. They believed in the man as one might believe in Jesus Christ. Some people needed leading. In or out of the gulag, they craved faith. But think if the tyrant had been as upright as his disciples trusted him to be. The heights he'd have achieved if he loved them. If, John Leal thought, until his idea began. 3. Phoebe. I hoped I'd be a piano genius, Phoebe told the group, in the first Cheja confession she tried giving. But I didn't just wait, she said. I wanted to work for it. I spilled time into the piano as I'd have put cash in a bank. I saw full concert halls in the future, solo recitals, front page plaudits. I practiced Liszt while imagined spotlights gilded the living room. Recollection is half invention, but it feels as though I spent my entire childhood training to prove I was the significant pianist I believed I'd be. So, I piled up trophies. It wasn't enough. The teacher flicked my hands with a rod each time I didn't hit the right note, but I didn't mind. My ambition outstripped his. Let my hands swell. I could use the extra span. Bright-knuckled, I tried again. The months ticked past, then years. I kept lists of rivals. I indexed others' exploits by age. Kiel, at 5, had given his first recital to the Danish king. Orai, 11, debuted at Carnegie Hall. Liu, 15. One night, my teacher called Liebig's Etude No. 5, the most challenging piece a soloist might attempt. It's eluded the finest pianist, he said. I rushed to find the Etude score. I learned it alone, in secret. I memorized Liebig's high trills. I flailed through wild ostinatos. Until then, nothing I played had evoked the Orphic singing I knew to be possible. It was an ideal I lacked the skill to bring to life. Each first place prize marked a point when I had let the music down. With Liebig, I failed less. His etude asked so much of me that at times I'd forget I had an eye. I should have learned from this that playing had to be birthed in a place without ego, in which I didn't exist except as a living conduit, Liebig's medium. But then, when I showed the teacher what I could do, he was astonished. I'd achieved more than he'd hoped, he said. He switched the piece in for the next competition, a city-level open. I was driven to the recital hall. The sun fell on my hands as I practiced Liebig again, fingers dancing across my legs. Spotlit, I listened to the traffic sing my name. The lax blue of LA, heat rippled, veiled the horizon. Like curtains, I thought, poised to rise. I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
So many of you are writers. We thought we'd really want to use most of the time for a real conversation about writing. So I urge you to start asking questions about writing. And I'm going to ask you the first question so that no one has to be the person who asks the first question. Can you talk about, given the 10 years, can you talk about revision? Can you talk about revision in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it took 10 years. I keep saying that because I think I'm just like aghast at how long it took. I knew I was never a fast writer. In grad school, I think I projected like 5. I thought 5 would be a reasonable number. And then I mentioned how harrowing Thanksgivings were, and it was in part because, well, my family was very supportive in general of my becoming a writer. And you know, the first 2, 3 years, 4 years, people were just really psyched for me. They were just like, "Great, you're gonna be a writer. When do we get to see your book in bookstores on bookshelves?" I'd be like, "Oh, I'm still working on it." By year 5, by year 6, people started getting nervous, and they would ask. At Thanksgivings again, which is where you see people you haven't seen in a while, right? So it's always a little stressful if you have to account for yourself in any way. They would ask, but they would ask like with nervousness, like, so how's the novel going? Like, how are you doing? Year 8 was when it got really bad because they just stopped asking me. They waited until I would leave the Thanksgiving table to like go get like extra whatever, to get extra like cranberry sauce. And then they would lean in and ask my husband in like lowered voices, how's Reese's novel? Is she all right? And they would ask that as though like I were like a dying invalid in the next room who could only be talked about in the third person because you can't like ask the person and be polite. Anyway, so for those 10 years, why did it take so long? I spent the first 2 years, and in retrospect, I wish I hadn't done this. I spent the first 2 years frantically revising the first 20 pages just over and over and over again, every day for several hours a day. For most of those 10 years, I wrote pretty much every day. And I just had this idea that I love sentences, like I love syllables, like I'm in it for the sentences. I love thinking about punctuation, like I have like strong feelings about semicolons. So I just thought if I get the first 20 pages exactly right, then I can move on, I'll have a solid foundation. And I realized, and then at the end of those 2 years, I threw it all away, and I started all over again, with the same characters pretty much, but that was 2 years of my life gone. And I realized, it was more proof to me of how dangerous and powerful language can be, and how powerful metaphors can be. You can't build a foundation for a building if you have no idea what the building looks like. So I didn't know if I was building like a bungalow shack by the beach or if I was trying to build a skyscraper. I didn't really know what the story was. Barely knew who the characters were. I was just agonizing over the language without having any real sense of what I was doing. So threw it all away, started all over. I talked to a couple of writer friends who are as language obsessed as I am, and they talked about how in early drafts they try to spin through them as fast as possible. And they're trying to, and so I have a friend who, she writes drafts by hand, Lauren Groff, who's an amazing writer. She writes drafts by hand, early drafts, and then she doesn't even read them. She just throws them away, starts all over again. So I didn't, and then someone else said that he puts an actual sheet of paper over his laptop screen so that he can't even look at what he's doing when he's going through early drafts. So I adapted these methods and I tried like 10 different things on my own. So early drafts, I wrote some by hand. I tried to go really fast. I did read them, but I would only read them once, and then I would just pull out the like 3 sentences that felt alive from each draft, that felt like they had something going on, stick them in a file, and then I'd start all over again. I used a computer program that turned my laptop into a de facto typewriter. It only let me backspace 1 character before it made me move on. It wouldn't let me like go back and like copy and paste things or like delete whole pages. And so that forced me to move through a draft. I wrote a draft in which I turned every paragraph white as I went so that it would blend in with the computer screen so that again I couldn't look at what I'd done and try to fix the sentences. I wrote, and then I started, something I love doing now that I've hit upon is something that works really well for me, is I'll write like 4 or 5 words and then I'll press enter and then I'll just keep going down the page. So it looks like a really sad, ragged, epic poem, and it's not. It's just a way for me to break up the sentence so I can't stare at it as a unit. And so I usually draft that way now before I read. So I'll do that, I'll reassemble, I'll do that, I'll reassemble. And what it is that for me, I need to work through, again, like what the story is, who the characters are, what they want from one another. The last time I've been working on my new novel for 2.5 years, and I was, at some point I was sitting there, and I was just typing, and I was feeling really confused, and I looked up and I realized I'd written in all caps, like, who are you people, and what do you want from me? Because I think that that's part of what writing is for me. I don't feel like a top-down writer. I feel very much like a writer who is in a process of slow discovery. Writing to me feels like a slow revelation. I almost feel, and I don't quite believe this because it doesn't feel logically correct, but I almost feel as though the book pre-exists me in an ideal shape, and that every sentence pre-exists me in an ideal shape, and I'm digging my way towards something that already exists, so there is a perfect form in which it can exist. And so yeah, that was some of the revisions that went into it. I could talk more about that, or I could talk about other things. I could talk about writing life, I could talk about, question over there.
So, small question, what's the name of the typewriter?
I think I got discontinued discontinued, but I think because someone else asked this and I went home and the app I'd used had been discontinued, but there are now like multiple ones. If you just Google like typewriter, program, laptop, like there are multiple ones.
And then larger, less pickier question?
Yeah.
So from what I've read of the book and the excerpt that you read, you write a lot about both sort of devotion and obsession, like when it comes to faith and when it comes to cults and national heritage, all that. Are we too obsessed as like sort of MFA writers with obsession, and how do we write about obsession and faith in productive and accurate and humane ways? Because I feel like it's a very easy thing to get wrong or to reduce into something not nuanced, and you don't do that. So how do you overstep that trap?
That is such a beautiful question. No one's asked me that. That's such a great question. Let's see. I think I don't worry. I try not to worry when I'm writing about what I'm getting right or wrong for a general populace or for readers at large. I try to worry instead about what feels right and true to me, and I try to dig deeper into what feels right and true to me. And the more I feel as though the more I do that, the more particular I get, the more it does stand a chance eventually of resonating with other people. Nasgard said something that I kind of love. Nasgard said something about how, do you all know who he is? He's like this Norwegian dude. Yeah, anyway, he's just like really fucking long books, like really long. And he said something about how anytime he wrote down something that he was like desperately ashamed of, those are all the parts that that readers just keep writing to him about. Like, man, I feel so understood. And it was the parts that he was so ashamed that he almost took them out. And I feel as though, for me, I think about pleasing myself. I think about writing things that feel true to me without worrying about how they fit in or how other people will receive them.
Sure.
It helps that, let's see. I think it helps me greatly. I think about this sometimes that I'm an immigrant. My parents are immigrants. I moved here when I was 3, but I'm an immigrant, and my parents' English is great. It's fantastic. It's not perfect, and so they can read something of mine and they won't fully understand everything. And so I think that does in some ways free me up from that one big hurdle of like, what will my parents think about this sex scene, and the next sex scene after that, and the next sex scene after that. So I just try not to worry at all about what anyone will think, and I try to write for myself.
Thank you. Yeah, that was wonderful.
Yeah, over there.
I have a question that's less writing specific.
Yeah, sure.
But, so, you said you were like an evangelical tech when you were younger. I grew up around that. I'm from Dallas, Texas. I went to like private, very evangelical school, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And without spoiling anything, there's all these rituals that the cult members have to do that are really pointless, I guess. Is like that's the whole. They seem very silly.
Yeah.
And I remember like when I was really young, I had to go to these like evangelical summer camps. There were a lot of rituals like that. I was wondering, like, did you have to do that too? Am I crazy? Like, were there like weird like, let's all go dance in the dark and feel Jesus rituals?
So I had this like mishmash of religious experiences. I grew up. My family's very Catholic, so I grew up Catholic, and then when I was in high school, junior high, most of my friends were evangelical Protestants, and they belonged to churches where people would talk in tongues and dance and sing. And as you can imagine, especially like as an adolescent in junior high and high school, that was like so fun compared to the just like Catholic Mass. If you've ever attended Catholic Mass, like they're so long and they're so repetitive. They spend like 90% of the time doing the exact same thing every single time. It's really something. Every now and then I'm like extremely unreligious now. I'm very opposed to getting religious services, but like on Mother's Day, like I'll go with my mother to be nice because I love her, and like it's like my gift to her is to stand at Mass with her. And so my husband, who grew up with no religion, he'll sometimes come with us again to be kind. And then like the first Mass he went to, he was just like, seriously? It's this long, and this is what you do? You just recite things? And I was like, yeah, that was my childhood, man. But so, yeah, I fell into, like, extremely charismatic, evangelical Protestantism. I did draw a lot of the rituals a lot of them were inspired. Some of them were inspired by having grown up that way. Some of them were inspired by, I did a lot of research into cults at a certain point. And cults also engage in a lot of pointless exercises. I think that part of it has to do, certainly with at least some of the cults I read about, it has to do with you want your believers to believe in you even when it goes against reason. You're actually like trying to get them more and more to do that. And so if you have them do, so at some point, for instance, my cult leader has his adherents dig giant holes and then fill them back up again. And it's just this totally pointless, difficult exercise. And it's teaching obedience. It's teaching faith in something that makes no sense to you. So that was part of it. There was some combination. Yeah.
When did you know that you want to write?
Yeah, that's a great question. I always love to read. I feel as though writing is very much, for a lot of people, and definitely for me, it's like an extension of reading in a way. Like there would be no writing without the reading. So I always loved to read. By the time I was in high school, I knew I loved writing enough that when I remember like when my principal asked me at some point, what do you want to be when you grow up? I said, I want to be a novelist. I want to write novels for the rest of my life. But then I went to college, and I have these incredibly supportive parents who said, you should do whatever you want with your life. You should be happy. You get one life. Do what you want. And so I think that just like freaked me out, and I became an econ major. Like I just like, went the opposite direction. I was just like, what does that even mean? And I was like, and I think I had these ideas that maybe I would need minor things like health insurance and an income, just like these little things that are sort of hard to find in this country. So I majored in econ, and Catherine might remember this because I remember Catherine, I think, found this to be sort of strange. I majored in econ. I like interned at investment banks.
Was there a Dole pineapple interlude, or am I?
Yes, I took a year off. I was so confused. I took a year off to figure out my life, and what I ended up doing was I had like a job in Paris, like a paying job, and it was with Dole pineapple, where I did like marketing stuff for them. I don't even remember, man. Like it was also terrible that I can't remember it. Any of you, I remember so little of the econ that I still to this day cannot draw a supply and demand graph. And if you've ever taken an econ class, it's like what you teach you on day one, and you do it until the end of econ. It's like you do it every day. I still don't know which way they run. Like my brain has ejected this information. I hated it so much. I loathed every second of it. There was a Milton class at Yale which is where I went to school, that I loved. That everybody loved, and I didn't take, and instead I took some sort of like corporate finance class because the two conflicted. To this day, I have nightmares about that class. And then the nightmare is that I'm back in school and I could take the goddamn Milton class that I didn't take. Anyway, I tried out investment banking, hated that. After college, I went off to a management consulting firm, and I was very lucky in a way in that I was working 90 hours a week and hating my job, and I was commuting I was living in New York City, and I had to drive to New Jersey every day through traffic to get to this job. And I was so miserable that at some point, and this was just like 5 months into the job, I was so miserable that at some point I thought to myself, and I didn't want to die, but the thought was, if I just gently crash this car, like gently, and I break my leg, then I won't have to go into work for a day or two. And then I thought, and like I think that was like it was like a moment of such clarity for me, because like as I thought that, I was like, I'm 21, I'm thinking about mangling myself so I don't have to go to my job. Like this isn't. I do have other choices. Like this isn't a jail sentence. I can think about other things. Second moment of clarity was I was flying to a project that the management consultant had me in somewhere in Phoenix, I think, and I was on the plane. I was looking out the window, and I remember it was just like one of those like operatic sunsets that you see when the sun is setting and you're in a plane, when there are clouds and the whole sky turns orange. And I was thinking to myself, I have no reason to try to describe this. And I thought, like, and it just made me so desperately sad, because it made me feel as though I had no point. Like, I think in that moment I realized, like, if I have no reason to try to describe this, and I'm not doing what I think I'm here to do. Like, what I know makes me happiest, what I know makes me feel the most fulfilled, the most alive. And so I applied to grad school, and I went to grad school, and then from then on, I haven't really looked back. And in some ways, that job in management consulting was a blessing, because at my most miserable and dejected with writing, because there aren't, I don't know, no, that's not true. I met one last November. Aside from one person who I met last November, I don't know any happy writers. I don't know any cheerful writers. There's just a pretty it's a bunch of malcontents running around, generally in a state of from anywhere from mild to very deep despair. Only feeling really good if they've had a good writing day, which only happens everywhere now and then. And it's not the most cheerful set of people. So I've had a lot of down days, but even on my worst down days, I can look back at that stint at that management consulting company and think it's not as bad as that was. So it gives me a very useful comparison point. Yeah.
You've talked about enjoying writing for its revelatory nature and sort of occupying a state in which you're sort of discovering the writing as you're going. And you've also talked about needing to write a foundation for the aims of writing. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little more about how you negotiate leaving space for revelation while also creating enough of a plan or a plot to reach your aim or destination.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I'm not sure that I have a conclusive answer for that at all, because I feel as though I wrote one book, and with the second book, I feel as though I'm relearning all over again how to write a book, and I think everyone says that it's just as hard the second time, it's just as hard the sixth time. But for me, at least, I don't like outlining. I don't like, what I usually do, what am I talking about? I wrote one book. I'm working on a second book. What I've done so far is I have written a few drafts, and then by then I have some sense of a story. And then so I'll write a one-page outline, a super rough one, and then I'll just look at it and just be okay, cool, and then I'll move on. I don't like to write outlines because, and I know that this is only what works for me, because I know people have wildly different processes. I don't like to write outlines, and I don't like to intricately plot out what's going to happen, because if I knew all of that, I wouldn't want to write the book. I wouldn't be interested. I'm finding out. I feel as though writing for me is a series. It's more I'm asking a series of questions that don't even necessarily get answered, but they're questions that lead to more questions. So there's something that the writer Christine Scott said that I love and I think about a lot. And if you haven't read her, she's amazing. Just one of the, just a fantastic sentence lover. And also writes really powerful, creepy fiction that people really love. Anyway, so she says that when she's stuck and she's on a sentence, instead of looking forward to figure out what to do next, she looks backwards at the last few sentences that she's written, and she looks for signposts there. And whether it's an acoustic signpost, or whether it's a signpost about character, or whatever it is. And so I try to do that. I just go from sentence to sentence, and I figure out, and I see how I feel. And then I do it all over again, and then I do it all over again. I tend to redraft over and over again until I get very close to the end, and then I know that I have sections that I feel better about, and then I have sections that make me still feel very uneasy, and then I'll work more on the uneasy sections. With this book, I was trying very hard one of my ambitions for it was I wanted to write a book in which I could open the book at random to any sentence and not want to change it all over again. And so I didn't consider it finished until I felt that had happened. I will say though, there were so many missteps along the way. It wasn't just those first 2 years. There's a whole section, there were 100 pages told from Phoebe, the woman who falls into the cult, told from her father's point of view. Took place in 1970 South Korea. And that just I worked on that for a while and I just chucked it. But I do, other people say this and I think I believe it. At the very least, it feels good to believe it. I think I do believe that nothing really truly gets wasted, and that the book is a palimpsest, and that the ghosts are still there. And people have said that they feel as though they feel like the ghost of Phoebe's father in the book, even if he's only really there for a page and a half, and that his presence does permeate in various ways. And I'm not sure that could have happened if I hadn't written those 100 pages that I then threw away. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
How do you recommend you walk the line between like being a 19-year-old who takes herself seriously as a writer, but also being like, I'm 19,
Yeah.
I'm a writer, but also what am I doing? Shouldn't I be having fun with it now? There's no expectations. So
Yeah.
I guess how do you navigate creating discipline or taking your work seriously, but also realizing there should be an element of fun?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was just talking about that yesterday with my friend Dave Lucas. He's a wonderful poet. He's a poet laureate of Ohio, I think this year and next year. And we were talking about like the element of play, the notion of play, and how important that is. And we were talking about Anne Carson, who, if you haven't read her yet, is incredible. I adore her. Like I adore her so much. I never want to meet her because I'm pretty sure I'd say something like terribly embarrassing, and I remember it like on my deathbed. I'd be like, what about that thing you said to Anne Carson? What we said, and I just feel like shame on her. There's no point. But I feel so she's someone who just like has remained playful in a way I adore. I think I think there's something, read a lot. I don't know that there's more to say than, or read a lot, write as much as you want. I think it's so much more important to read a lot than to write a lot. And yeah, but also I get it. Like I remember the minute I hit grad school, just feeling like so desperately like I wanted, like there's so much that you want, and there's so much that, and writing can take so very long. I feel as though like the fastest writer that I know still take like 2-3 years per book, and that's not a short amount of time. Yeah. Read more poetry maybe. I feel so like poets have more fun. I don't know that that's, I don't know why, but I have this very like, my poet friends say that that this is incorrect, but I have this like very romantic view of poets. I feel as though, because they like, I've been to residencies, artist residencies, which is where there are these fantastic things that you should absolutely apply for after. They don't tend to accept like college students, but after you graduate, you should apply for them. What they do is they feed you, they house you, it's free, it's like you're a kid again, and and the only expectation is that you're there like doing your work.
Like college.
Sorry?
Like college.
It's like college, but without any grades and with no other classes. It's like a college where it's just about writing. And if there were no classes, like you can do whatever you want. At residencies, like most of the poets I know, they kind of seem to like, they like work for like an hour and then they take long walks. So I imagine that what poets do is like in life is they write for an hour and then they just sort of like take long walks and like take a lot of drugs. I don't know, like I don't know, but it seems amazing. But my poet's face, it's not like that. That's not like that at all. But yeah, I think there's reading widely. I think there's. I think I can't stress enough how important reading widely can be. Reading, I try so hard to, because I have very strong preferences about what I tend to like, what I tend not to, I have like allergies that I'm conscious of, and I try very hard, especially now I'm trying very hard as I'm in the early stages of a new book, to read things that I know I won't like, that feel totally like not my kind of thing. And so like, I don't even know, we were joking about like hypermasculine writers, and so like, I don't know, like a hypermasculine, misogynist dude, like being a dude, that's not my cup of tea lately. But I've been trying to read more things like that I know that like I feel are not what instead of just like reading Anne Carson all day long, which I could happily do. So yeah, I would just, yeah. Yeah.
How did you support yourself, financially while you were writing your book?
That's a great question, and a very real question, especially in America. In Canada, they give stipends to artists just to stay alive, just because they're artists. Like, can you imagine? Anyway, so what did I do? I did a combination of things. I did some freelance copy editing, freelance writing. I love applying for grants. I love applying for free money. Whenever it's like for me, I'm like very insomniac and anxious, and like often I'm up at like 4 a.m. and don't know what to do with myself. And I find it very relaxing to just like research more grants and look for more things to apply to, because grants are there are whole years when I've been able to more or less support myself with like one grant, and they're fantastic. They're a pain in the ass to apply for, but once you start doing them, they're a lot easier. But anyway, I taught, I realized, okay, I think the happiest writers I know with jobs are the ones who figured out what kind of jobs still let them write and keep their brains free. And so for me, I very quickly realized that I loathe office jobs. Like, I hate being at an office from 9 to 6. I hate the banter and the how was your weekend? Who gives a shit? Like, you don't care. You're like talking to his colleagues who you barely know, and you keep asking each other how your weekend was. And so I tried very hard to stay away from office jobs. Teaching is great. But teaching is like you dip in, you dip out. Like, it's like you have so much more autonomy. So there was all of that. I tried to prioritize jobs that let me work from home, basically, and or teach briefly, not like from 9 to 6. Though there was, but then I always hesitate to say this because there's only so much you can control. But every writer I know who has a partner, who wants a job, every writer I know who has a partner who's not an artist, it helps tremendously. And I hesitate to say that because love is wonderful, love is amazing. Wherever it happens, it's great, it's magic. You should go for it. But if that partner also happens to want a job that provides health insurance, then that can be really helpful. And I feel as though not enough people talk about this. But that's so many of my writer friends have essentially it's essentially like you have like a sponsor, but it's like a one-person sponsor, sort of like providing health insurance through the lean times. Yeah, I always hesitate to say that because there's only so much you can do, right? Like, if you happen to fall in love with like a fantastic ragged poet, then go for that. But yeah.
Who is, or I guess, how big is your feedback circle? How many people do you share your writing with and look for edits from? Because I know that it depends on writers, and some people only have a couple, and some people have like 10 or writing groups. Or...
Yeah, that's a great question. I found this in grad school too, because I workshopped parts of my novel in grad school. I have found that with the novel, at least, it's very different with short stories. With the novel, I don't like workshopping a piece of it ever. I want to have someone see the whole thing. So I have a writing group in San Francisco, which is where I live. That's been running since some of them were in college together. So it's a very long-running writing group. It's great. I love them. But I haven't workshopped anything with them for like 3 years maybe, because I've been working on this new novel that I don't want to show anybody. So in my acknowledgements, I thank all the people who read the whole thing, and over those 10 years, it's still only maybe like 10 people, including my agent and including my husband. And so for me, I don't love having a ton of voices in my head. And every single person I asked people who I knew would be good readers for it. And in every case but one, these are people with whom I share a lot of reading tastes, who I knew would pick up on, who I knew would tend to like the book. I made one exception, and I found this actually really helpful, and I would recommend it in general if you can stand it. I asked a friend to read it who I thought might hate it, which is like, I love his writing, but we're very different writers and readers, and I did this on purpose because I wanted to know what people who would tend to hate the kinds of things I like might think. And so when he sent me back his edits, I read them, and luckily it was in the morning, so my husband was home before he went off to do his thing. And then I read them, I dove into bed, and I think he was in the next room, and I think I just started bleeding like, help me. Like, I was like, help me, because I was so unhappy with the comments. But I found that to be incredibly useful, because then it didn't mean that I agreed with him at all. I agreed with parts of what he said, but it let me then have that in mind too as I went forward. So yeah, I have like total maybe 10 people, and I think with this new book it's going to be a smaller number actually, because now I have I don't know how much you probably know that most prose writers have agents who send your book to editors, and I adore my agent. And I went to her in part because, or I wanted to work with her in part because she represents some of my like very favorite writers, and I had a feeling that in that case, she would have a reading taste that would work for me, and I found that to be true. Like I love her reading eye as well as her agenting abilities. So it's probably going to be with this next book. I'm probably going to show it to my husband, who's a fantastic reader for me, and like one friend, and then my agent, and then we'll see how we feel. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Can I ask like a boring like daily process kind of question?
Yeah.
So like when you were first starting work on the novel, did you have like a daily I'm gonna write X amount of words per day thing? Was that helpful to you through the whole thing? Did you abandon that or alter that word count in any way? Or like what was your so you get out of bed in the morning and like how does the book go? What's the schedule like?
Yeah, sure. I actually love thinking about process. I feel as though, at least for me, it's really important. I in part thought I couldn't become a writer after college because I thought I wouldn't have deadlines, and like I was always a writer who toward the end of the deadline like would just like have like several really late nights and like churn something out. And I was like, how am I supposed to write anything without that kind of pressure? So at the beginning, especially toward the beginning, I had a thing where I would try to write 300 words a day, and I was part of this fantastic email group that you can set up with your friends or with people you're friendly with. You can set up with people online. You commit, it's still running, it's an ongoing thing, where at the start of the month, you commit to writing 300 words a day. The poets commit to writing a poem a day, which is amazing. I don't understand how they do it. I commit to writing 300 words of prose a day, and then you email it to one another by midnight that day. And importantly, you're discouraged from commenting ever on it. And so there's no obligation to like read your friends' shitty first drafts. And they're not reading yours, also very importantly, so you're not feeling self-conscious about what you're sending people. And that helped me for like a solid 2-3 years of drafting, because I don't like the early drafts. Like early drafting for me feels like labor and it's not fun. I have real fun. My fun for me when I'm happy is when I can spend all day on like 2 sentences. But again, that's not useful in the early drafts for me. So I did all that. In terms of how I go from getting up in the morning to working, I always feel like such a hypocrite. I haven't been writing quite as rigorously since December when thinking about this book and doing work for publicizing this book has taken up so much of my time that my schedules change very differently. But for 10 years, especially toward the end, I had all these rules in place. So I love to go straight from bed to work. I like that, you know, that sort of like dreamy state you're in when you wake up. I want that to be intact when I start writing. And so I would roll out of bed. I work from home, so I work in the living room. I'd roll out of bed. I would make myself coffee because I do need the coffee. I used to be a coffee snob. Like I used to be the kind of tiresome person who grinds their own coffee and has like real opinions about this. If you're one of those people, then great. It's more delicious that way. Not that you're tiresome. I was tiresome about it. I gave that up so much that I got a Keurig machine for myself, which for anyone who loves coffee is just like a sad like it's like a corpse of coffee. It's like no one who loves coffee should drink it. But for me, it was too much. It interrupted me too much to make coffee the way I wanted to make it. So I get my sad coffee and then I go over to my laptop and I try to work for an hour or two before I eat anything. Because I want to get into the rhythm before I really start eating it. I love food, and so I find food to be very distracting and very pleasurable. And so I need to get a rhythm before that happens. I try very hard to have, when I'm teaching, I try very hard to have later afternoon classes, doctor's appointments. I'm always like grabbing that like 4:30 slot so that it can come as late as possible in the day. Just doing everything I can to keep the world away from me while I'm writing, as long as I can. Because the minute the world interrupts, I have a like no lunch rule. I hate lunch. I wanted to write an essay that would have, when I'm writing, I hate lunch. Not when I'm like wandering around, but I wanted to write an essay, and the essay was going to be titled Against Lunch. And my husband was just like, what is the point of this essay? You're just going to say you hate lunch, that like lunch interrupts your work. No, that's true. It's not really an essay. I guess it's just a tweet. But lunch interrupts me so much because I start fretting about. I start thinking about who I'm gonna see, and then afterwards I'm thinking about like things I said that I kind of regret, and then I feel embarrassed, and then like the shame starts filtering in, and it's just like it's just too much. Like humanity's so much. Dinner it's fine. After dinner I'm not really working, but after lunch I am. So yeah, I had a lot of measures in place to try to keep the writing the focus of my life, and not any of the rest of it. Oh, I found this to be really helpful. The minute I read that Obama only had like 3 suits because he didn't want to have to think about his clothes. And I instantly stopped buying clothes that aren't black. So I pretty much only have black dresses. And if it's really cold, I have like a pair of black jeans and some black shirts. I will like mix it up with shawls, but that's it. And so it means that I never have to think about what am I gonna wear today. The answer is always it's gonna be a black dress of some kind. And it just like trying to save as much of my brain as I can for work. I have 3 lunches I alternate between. They're like reasonably nutritious. There's like avocados are involved and like eggs and things. And then I'm again trying to cut out of my life the question of what am I gonna have for lunch. Mm-hmm. This is what works for me. I'm not saying like you have to do this, or like I don't know a lot of people who do this. It just happens to be what works for me to make my life as stripped down as possible so that I can work. Yeah.
Thank you.
You've also made evident that the reward for writing a book and publishing it is that you go on a book tour that completely disrupts the writing life. It's the opposite of the writing life.
Yeah.
So I have a question. In this famous 10 years of writing this novel, what was the thing that is still in the book, presumably, where you surprised yourself the most?
Oh, that's such a great question. Oh man, I miss taking class with you, Catherine. Those of you taking class with her, I like MU so much. She like said something when I saw her just a couple hours ago. She said something within like 5 minutes that I was like, oh, that's such a good point. I need to write that down. Let's see, what surprised me the most? For those of you who've read the book, there's a key pivotal scene in the book in which someone does something very violent towards someone they love. That surprised the hell out of me, and I was like very distressed because it wasn't who I thought the person was. And I tried writing that scene over and over again. I tried taking out that scene basically. I tried making that scene anything else, and it felt really false, and I couldn't really figure out why. So I went back and I reread what I had up to that point, and I realized there were ways in which the character prioritized his own needs. There were problems. They had a problematic male gaze. There were ways in which he was a person who the scene felt most truthful written the way it is in the book. And I think a lot about something that my grad school mentor Michael Cunningham said, that we must love our characters as God does and not more, which I really love. And so I think very much about I never tell my characters who they are. I'm truly trying to find out from them who they are and dig and like yank it out. Not yank, it's not that fast. Gently tug it out of them, I guess. It's more like it.
One more question, and then ideally you buy all the books and then you ask Lise to sign them, and you can talk with her. Any final question, large or small?
Yeah, well, I have a question about, you said that you did some research about cults. What was the process like?
Yeah.
How do you do research?
Yeah, so I did a lot of research into a few things. So cults, the history of abortion rights, reproductive rights in America, and into radical religious groups of various kinds. So what I would do was I would research I would read everything I could find for like a couple of months, nonfiction. And then with each of these fields, I would try to forget everything I'd learned. I just like put it away and stop completely. And for me that was important because I wanted to have the faith that I knew enough to be able to start making things up. And I didn't want anything to feel, I didn't want it to feel too closely patterned on a particular cult or a particular religious group. I wanted it to arise, I wanted the cult and this group and the whole situation to arise from the characters' own past and their own obsessions and who they are as people, rather than some like pre-made model that I was trying to force them into. So And I've been finding that to be true. My current novel, the protagonist, the narrator is a photographer, is something I realized. And I'm running into a lot of trouble with it. I was so annoyed when I learned she was a photographer because I was like, I don't know anything about photography. I'm terrible at even for like Instagram, I filter the shit out of photos because like I just like look at my photos and I was like, this is a really bad picture. It does not look like a good picture. I know it looks bad, but I don't know what to do about it. So I'm going to take a photo class. I'm trying to read as much about photography as I can because currently I don't know enough to start imagining freely and fully and believing in my own imagination.
Okay, well, thank you so much.